This is Toledo Symphony Lab, a behind-the-scenes look at the world of classical music from WGTE Public Media and your Toledo Symphony. I'm Brad Cresswell. Joining me in the studio today are the Toledo Symphony's president and CEO, Zach Vassar, and principal second violin and artistic administrator, Merwin Siu. We're talking today about the 7 Deadly Sins. That is a concert that's happening this weekend at the Toledo Museum of Art Peristyle with the Symphony, February 23rd and 24th, so it's Friday and Saturday, 8 o'clock p.m. We will be hearing Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht's 7 Deadly Sins, starring the great Storm Large. She is joined by the Hudson Shad Quartet, which is a wonderful group, reminiscent of the Comedian Harmonists in Germany, if you know that group, and so they will be performing on the stage. Gentlemen, let's talk about the 7 Deadly Sins. Who can name the 7 Deadly Sins for me? Do you know what they are?
I'm going to nominate the person who has been to a Catholic school.
Oh, yeah.
Brad, that's
the
got to be
7
you.
cardinal sins.
Let's see, there's envy, there's greed, there's lust, pride.
Yeah.
I got 4, I'm halfway.
Gluttony.
Gluttony, of course.
Sloth.
Can't forget gluttony and sloth.
Is debauchery one?
No. There are 7 deadly sins: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. It helps that I have it right in front of me. But do you know what are the 7... I was going to say the 7 deadly virtues, the 7 virtues
Camelot.
that counteract those sins. Can we name those? So the virtue for lust is chastity. The virtue for gluttony is temperance. I happen to live in temperance, and that's perfect because it's, related to gluttony, which is a sin near and dear to my heart. Thought I'd save you the trouble. And the virtue for greed is charity, or sometimes generosity, right? And evidently that is like the greatest virtue of all is charity.
As is philanthropy.
Yeah, well, they're related. Sloth, the virtue is diligence. Wrath, the virtue is patience. Envy, the virtue is gratitude. And pride, the virtue is, can you guess what the virtue for pride is? What's the opposite of pride?
Humility.
Humility. Very good.
Said by the Canadian.
And we have our quota for this week.
Yeah, there we go. Although Zach is ahead of me.
I got to say, though, those Canadian curlers.
They're tough.
They're tough.
For some reason, I just pictured Merwin with like a bunch of curlers in his hair. It took me a minute to figure out. That
Brad,
was like
it's Olympics time.
An Olympic reference.
Maybe you haven't heard.
Well, see, that's Greek mythology. I'm all on Christian dogma right now, okay? Because we're headed into the 7 Deadly Sins. Can somebody talk a little bit about Kurt Weill's version of 7 Deadly Sins? Because it's, those sins are in there, but it's a drama as well. What happens?
Well, actually, this started out as more of a sung ballet. So the heroine, Anna, is often portrayed by both a singer and a dancer, though more and more it's being portrayed just by this single singer. I think that with Kurt Weill, he takes the 7 Deadly Sins, he sets it very much in the United States. Each sin is identified with a city in the United States.
Right.
And there is a not uber subtle political angle to that. There's a little bit of an anti-capitalist screed in this, but it's you can
I would
totally
say more than a little bit.
I think you can enjoy the piece without hearing any of it. But that is part of it. It's one of the reasons he does set it specifically in the United States. But
all the capitalists in the audience are going to be offended. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think you can enjoy the beautiful music and the incredible performance, and
Listen, if you can't have a sense of humor about it, I mean, what's the point?
Well, it's actually funny because Kurt Weill eventually became a great Hollywood composer and had to suppress some of his earlier works so that he would continue to get work as a Hollywood composer.
And I should point out that this was written in the 1930s, so anti-capitalism in the 1930s, coming from a German German musical style that was kind of what is parodied now as cabaret.
Yeah, it was also a time when Weill and Brecht had to get out.
That's right,
of Germany, being Jewish.
All right.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if this came before or after Three Penny Opera. I think this came just after.
This was after, yeah.
It's a fairly heady political brew as well, so kind of that context is very important to consider when hearing the piece.
Now, the one person that I didn't mention that is taking part in this performance is Nick Adamski, who is going to be sort of the master of ceremonies, right? Mm-hmm. And we've set it up so he's going to call in sometime during the podcast, so we'll engage him in a conversation and a little quiz as well, hopefully. But what can you tell us about him while he's not here?
While he's not here, okay. So Nick Adamski, he's a friend. He is a creative type. He has started in Brooklyn this organization called the Poetry Brothel, which seeks to...
I like it already.
which he probably has a better way of teeing it up, but it seeks to use poetry to some sort of a deeper pursuit of getting into the words and celebrating it together. So it's a social thing that people go to the Poetry Brothel in Brooklyn, and now there are chapters all over the world to have a poetry reading with characters. I think Nick's role or character is called Tennessee Pink, and he'll be bringing that role here to connect the sin through poetry and then music. So this becomes a very artful and theatrical demonstration.
Yeah, I was looking through their website, the Poetry Brothel, and all these people dressed up as characters. It's kind of like performance art, right?
That's a much better way of saying it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, I think one of the things that's really important, and I'm sure Nick would be better suited to expound on it, is you have this great combination of performance and intimacy. And I think a lot of times when you think of reading poetry or consuming poetry, it's a fairly private, intimate sort of act. Mm-hmm. And the idea of the Poetry Brothel is to somehow add a performative, dramatic element to it without sacrificing the possibility for intimacy. So I think you have these sort of alternations between these very public performances and then these one-on-one private readings that guests have with the characters. So I think he's a really interesting performer to bring into this, because I think that's a really good analog to how people consume classical music. A lot of times it's this sort of one-on-one, or I am in a listening space by myself, and yet there is also this huge public element to it. And I think, having him kind of come in to mediate the concept of the sins and bring in some great poetry and to help introduce the pieces, I think it's a really, really interesting way to tie the first half together.
And I should say that the first half of the program, each piece does have either directly or indirectly some sin tied to it. So I think having the poetry to set up each piece will kind of set the context for the sin. And then you hear the music as kind of an elaboration of the sin or the poetry, and then you move on to the next sin. So if you were to play these works back to back, they might not be the most connected program, but using the words as the connection, as the glue, is, I thought, a very artistic way to demonstrate this, and I give full credit to Merwin for that.
So let me get it straight now. He is the master of ceremonies for the whole concert, right?
Well, actually,
or just for the Seven Deadly Sins?
Just for the first half.
Okay.
The Kurt Weill actually has its own introduction and epilogue, so it kind of is its own dramatic whole. So it doesn't need, It
has a Greek chorus, and it has Storm Large and what have you.
Yeah. So I think what we felt was kind of more necessary was to have that, not exactly explanation, but the setting of the mood before each piece of the first half.
And if I had to characterize him, imagine somebody like Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow, and he happens to read a lot of poetry. That would be him.
Yeah. Speak of the Sparrow. There he is, calling right now. Let me hit a couple buttons here and see if I can bring him in. Hello?
Hello?
Is this Nick?
This is Nick. Is this Brian?
This is Brad.
Oh, Brad.
But I will answer to anything, so you can call me Brian if you like. That's okay.
I'll call you Brad.
Okay. We have Merwin here, and
hey Nick, how are you?
And we have your old school chum, Zach. Here.
Hey there, Nick.
Hello.
Thank you for calling in. We were just talking all about you, so now you can set the record straight.
Oh, fantastic. I'm sure that everything said was true.
So we kind of set up the idea of the show as we have the sins and we have the poetry as kind of an analog to, as Merwin very wisely said, the intimacy of listening to music, the intimacy of listening to poetry, and connecting those two things in a programmatic way. So I'd be interested to hear from you if you could set up, what your thought is as an artist going into this concert, and some of the preparations you've done to come up with the poetry. And then if you have a few moments, we can also dive into what the Poetry Brothel is.
No, I just want to hear about the Poetry Brothel.
Yeah,
that's what I'm interested in.
Okay, well, we can get right to it if you'd like.
Go for it.
So the Poetry Brothel is a very old idea with a bit of a new twist, which was simply that my business partner and I felt that poetry is simply better one-on-one. Not that we're not going to have a great time next week at the Symphony, but we wanted to give people who did not necessarily have the opportunity to lay in bed next to a poet and have a poem read to them the opportunity to do that. So just over 10 years ago, right after I graduated from graduate school, I started working with a woman named Stephanie Berger, who I met in school, and we created something called the Poetry Brothel, which is literally a cabaret-inspired show where poets play the role of prostitutes and are available to give one-on-one private poetry readings to paying customers. It was a pretty revolutionary idea when we started doing it. And we didn't even really know what we were doing when we started, but over the years we've sort of figured it out. But yeah, brothels also historically have been places where, sort of fringe elements of society, artists that were not necessarily accepted in polite society were able to go and feel like they had a place of their own, a place that they could do what they wanted to do. For example, jazz musicians in New Orleans at the turn of the century were playing, in country clubs and white supper clubs and things like that. And then after they were done with their shift, they would go to the brothel and play the music that they wanted to create. And that's sort of the birthplace of jazz, as far as I know it. So we wanted to create a place in New York City in 2008, oddly enough, where poets could mix with painters and musicians and dancers and all different kinds of artists to create a kind of new feeling of just the intersection of different art forms where people could sort of do whatever they wanted to do, and people and an audience could come and just watch it sort of happen or unfold.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, let's pivot back to the Peristyle now and tell me, are you bringing some of that artistic aesthetic with you, with what you're presenting and what you're doing as the Master of Ceremonies, the poetry you're going to read? Try to paint a picture for us of what we can expect here in Toledo.
Well, I'm not exactly positive where it's all going to end up and land.
Have you looked at it yet?
What did they tell you before I got on the phone? I have actually been preparing for this role, not only for the last 10 years, but for the last couple of weeks or many weeks actually. I intend to bring I intend to bring to bear everything that I've learned over the course of this sort of career that I built for myself, and really show the hometown crowd what I've been doing out there for the last decade. I haven't really discussed whether I'll be performing as myself or my alter ego, but I think a lot of him has sort of leaked into my own persona and psyche over the years.
You're talking about Tennessee Pink, right?
I am. I'm talking about Tennessee Pink himself.
So, Nick, when we first contacted you about this idea of pairing poetry and sin, was that the sort of thing where you said, well, of course, duh, or was it the sort of thing where you had to sit down and say, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think poetry can encapsulate all aspects of the human condition, so it wasn't a stretch to think that you would want to pair it with sin or the seven deadly sins specifically. The thing that I've found to be most challenging so far about this role or this job is finding poems that really lock in on a cardinal sin in that way. A lot of poetry either wants to, sort of dance around and address a lot of things, or touch on a sin and then kind of like bounce off of it to get to some other place. But the ones that really, it's not that difficult to find poems that address the seven deadly sins, but it's quite difficult to find great poems that address them and do it in a really thorough way. So that's been the challenge for me. I've actually really opened up my Rolodex and written and communicated with a lot of people about this topic, and it's been very interesting to see the sort of easy answers that a lot of people bring, and then the kind of unexpected ones, and then just how everybody feels like it should be really easy to find these poems, and then almost everyone that I've talked to has come back and said, it's not quite as easy to find them as I thought it was going to be. So it's been a really interesting project.
And you've come back with an amazing list of authors. I mean, the poets that you've come back with stretch from Chaucer,
Sylvia Plath, Neruda.
I mean, it's
Shakespeare,
so
Milton.
wide-ranging. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, well, that sounds interesting now.
Yeah.
There is not a period of time in which these topics were not addressed by poets. I've read a bunch of poems by contemporary poets. The funny thing too is I've written to a lot of poets and then had other poets suggest those poets. So these poets are writing back to them like, it's funny, I just had 3 poets tell me that I should read these 3 poems by you, and then the person's like, well, I don't know if that's necessarily totally about greed, and I'm like, well, it would be great if it was, because that has been the most difficult one to find.
So are you saying that there's some poetic license going into this?
There's a lot of poetic.
Sorry, Zach. That was a bad buzzer. You know what I find interesting is that it seems like throughout history, everybody is interested in the sins and not in the virtues, Like if you go back and you look at the Divine Comedy of Dante, nobody even wants to look at paradise. They just want to dive right into the inferno and read about everybody, how they're tortured in hell.
It's gossip, right?
Everybody
just wants to talk about what their neighbors are doing wrong.
As long as they're not part of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You never hear about the 7 deadly virtues as opposed to the 7 deadly sins. However,
I was thinking about that last night. Like, are you guys, is the symphony going to do a program later about virtues or a virtuous life, or is that just?
It'll be a very short program.
All of our programs are about virtue.
Virtuosity.
Well played.
Yeah. Do we have time to do a quick quiz?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Generally, I come up with some kind of a quiz that we do during the course of this podcast, and so I have a quick little punishment quiz right now. So the way that this works, Nick, is I'm gonna say a sin, and I'm going to give everybody 3 choices of what the eternal punishment is for that sin, and they have to choose which one is correct. Are you with me?
I'm with you.
This is like your Met halftime quiz.
Exactly.
On steroids.
Halftime quiz.
Or intermission quiz.
Here we go. The first sin is pride. Will you be broken on the wheel? Will you have your ears and nose burned off? Or will you be sawed in half?
Who's that go to?
Anybody who wants to jump in there.
Ears and nose burned off. Gotta be.
Anybody else? That is not the correct answer.
I feel like stretched on the wheel.
Broken on the wheel.
Yeah.
That's correct. You're not reading upside down my paper, right?
No, I'm not.
Now for envy. Out of these 3, will you be boiled in oil? Will you be placed in freezing water? Or will you have spikes driven into your feet?
Wow.
Well, I had a lot of fun making up these other tortures.
I would say that the boiling in oil and the freezing water, one inspired the other. So I'm going to say that the boiling in oil would be the original answer.
No, placed in freezing water.
Ah.
Yeah.
Are these Dante's punishments, or did you come up with these punishments?
The Brad Cresswell's Inferno.
Oh, no.
These punishments are not condoned by WGTE Public Media.
You're on to me now. No, these are like the cardinal punishments. These are even predating Dante, supposedly, because Dante kind of did his own thing here and there. For gluttony, will you be force-fed fingers and toes? Will you be force-fed rats, toads, and snakes? Or will you be force-fed animal waste?
Oh, gosh.
I feel like rats, toads, and snakes seems more biblical to me.
Yeah, that's right, Merwin. You got it. Rats,
Merwin's
toads, and
3
snakes.
for 3 here.
For lust.
I think there's a Simpsons episode about all 3 of those possibilities, actually.
For lust. For the sin of lust, will you be forever lost at sea? Will you suffer rat torture? That's where they take rats and place them inside your intestines. Hungry rats. Or will you be covered in fire and brimstone?
I would say fire and brimstone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Fire and brimstone. Hey, we're on a roll here. For anger, is it live dismemberment? Will you have your head crushed in a vice? Or will you be thrown into a snake pit?
For anger?
Anger, yeah.
It seems pretty exotic for something that's pretty common.
Well, anger is a sin.
Uh-huh.
Anger or wrath,
Uh-huh.
right?
Nick, any ideas on this one?
I just want to say snake pit. I just want to say those words.
Well, you can say it, but it's not the proper
vice,
punishment
right?
for this.
Correct.
Yeah.
Is it the vice?
Nope. It is live dismemberment.
Oh,
Live
wow.
dismemberment.
Which is a little weird because,
Yeah.
if you're being punished for a sin after you're dead, how can you have live dismemberment? I guess, you're just suffering the pain.
It's a semantic
There must be
sin.
theater in hell, right?
Absolutely.
That's right.
We've only got 2 to go. For greed, will you be boiled in oil? Will you be smothered with hot metal? Or will you be dipped in molten lava?
Wow.
For greed.
How about boiled in oil?
That's right. You got
Yes! I really wanted to get one. I feel like I'm supposed to be an expert on this topic.
There's the chorus.
it. And finally, the last one, sloth. Will you have your knees split by spikes? Will you be placed in a caged coffin so you are immobile for all eternity? Or will you be thrown into a snake pit? Now, here's your opportunity to say snake pit again.
Snake pit.
You got it. That's right.
I think it reflects very badly on us that by far our most successful quiz was answering the punishments for the 7 deadly sins. Like far and away our most successful
When
quiz.
Brad goes and gets movie quotes, that's where we're the worst.
Yeah. Movie quotes. No movie quotes today. So I have to say, I think Merwin and Nick tied it. Or did you get 2 also, Zach?
I can't even tell you.
I don't really keep track of these things.
It would be pride to tell you the answer to that, so I'm not going to.
That's right. That's right. Okay, before we go, I want to go around and each of us tell me your favorite sin. Let's start with you, Nick. If you had to be a sin, what would you be? If you had to choose.
They're all so great. I would be a lustful glutton.
No, you got to pick one.
What? I'm choosing gluttony.
See, he's a poet.
Through gluttony, I'm also lust. Yeah. Okay, lust it is.
Lust. Nick is lust. You can choose the same sin if you want. Who are you, Merwin?
Well, up until I had a kid and he is not allowing me to sleep at all, I would have definitely said gluttony, but right now sloth sounds awfully tempting. I'm going to go with sloth.
So that's your wannabe sin. It's not your actual sin.
Yeah.
And you guys left the best one for me, so I'll take gluttony.
You take gluttony? Oh, I would have taken gluttony.
I'll take gluttony in the form of a scotch bottle.
Yeah. I don't know. I probably would take, well, gosh, you guys took all the good ones already.
You said
wow, you sound really wrathful about that.
Yeah, I can.
You can join me over here in lust if you want.
Well, what were you, lustful gluttony? Can I be gluttonous lust? How about that?
You can.
Greedy lust.
Glust.
Glust.
Here we go.
Glust.
So, we can start
We got there.
Let's see if we can do a Venn diagram for sins, right? If you have lust and gluttony together is gluttony.
Gluttony.
I feel like the sacred geometry is going to come into play.
Absolutely.
We'll work on that. Well, the concert is this weekend. It's Friday and Saturday night at 8 o'clock p.m. at the Toledo Museum of Art Paris style. The 7 Deadly Sins of Kurt Weill. Also a whole slate of sinful music. Our host, our master of ceremonies, our poetic performer, Nicholas Adamski, who, did we mention you're from Toledo? You're a native of Toledo, right?
I am, born and raised.
This is a homecoming. You're going to have friends and family coming to see you?
Boy, I hope not.
Okay. Well, nobody ever listens to this podcast, so they won't know. Don't worry about it.
I'm kidding. I would love for them all to come out. I'm hoping my high school English teachers come out. That's the one I'm really pulling for.
Do you have Doc Demar coming?
We'll see. I actually talked to Doc a few days ago. He's been one of my advisors on this.
Is that how Chaucer got into this?
No, Chaucer's been a part of this from the beginning, Zach. You know that.
Doc DeMarkowski was the AP English teacher at St. John's when Nick and I were there.
You told me some story about Stravinsky and what was it?
Yeah, so
Stravinsky and Diaghilev.
Yeah, there. Nick is, besides the Poetry Brothel, Nick, I think before he got into poetry, he was an expert on, Nick, what was it, Stravinsky, Nijinsky, and Diaghilev?
And the Ballet Russe. But Zach, I mean, to be honest, I think you're the real expert. I was sort of the JV... I was the JV presenter on that topic.
I think that was Zach's point. I think he was trying to make the point there.
Well, he made it.
Hopefully.
Sure, pride, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say. I get stakes driven through my ankles? Was that it?
Switch your sin. Well, thanks to you, Nick, for coming on and talking with us. It was a lot of fun. We look forward to having you this weekend. And again, you can find more information about this weekend's concert with Storm Large, Hudson Shad, Nicholas Adamski, the Toledo Symphony, all conducted by Anya Billmeyer. That is at ToledoSymphony.com, or the phone number. Let's hear the phone number.
419-246-8000.
Can we do kind of some kind of a jingle? You know how what
Radio
is it?
Days sort of jingle.
Da, 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 da. Empire Carpet? No.
We'll figure it out.
Probably have to pay them a royalty now. Anyway, thanks again, Nick, for joining us today here on Toledo Symphony Lab.
My pleasure.
Am I saying your name right, Nick? Adamski?
You are.
Okay.
Yeah, you're nailing it.
Excellent. That's what I do.
Nick, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for this performance, and
me too. Yeah.
Very excited for you to get here.
Toledo Symphony Lab is generously underwritten by a gift from the estate of Barbara Garwood and is a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with our sponsor, the Toledo Symphony. You can download episodes of this program as a podcast by going to our website, that's wgte.org/lab, or you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. And remember, you can check out all upcoming events at the Symphony by visiting their website. That's at ToledoSymphony.com, and there are various social media outlets on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My thanks to Zach Vassar, Merwin Sue, and our special guest, Nicholas Adamski. I'm Brad Cresswell, and this has been Toledo Symphony Lab here on FM 91.